a pleasure to have you here at Milliken and Company showroom in London. My name is Halsey Cook. I'm the CEO of the company. And I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion about how we can accelerate decarbonization and this esteemed panel that we have here. I'm so anxious to hear what you have to say. I'll just maybe kick off the subject a little bit about where we are as a company. About 5 years ago, we made a declaration that we were going to start publishing a sustainability report, which was not required for the company. We're a 158-year-old privately held company. We're a fifth generation descendants of the original founder of the company, Seth Milliken. None of the company is in management, but they stay active in terms of what the company stands for. So as a way to kind of begin that journey, we articulated our values for the company and we articulated a purpose statement. Together, we strive to positively impact the world around us for generations to come. And we said that we're about integrity, we're about excellence, we're about innovation, sustainability, and our people. And those 5 values drive everything we do. And we set out to put some goals together for 2025 and try and operationalize these values, which is a difficult thing to do, but we wanted to move from the words to results and change the company, if you will, for the future. So we have 12 goals, which are centered on people, product, and on the planet. And I think as we started that journey and started to create programs around decarbonizing and reducing our greenhouse gases, we found that it was a very natural extension that we should make the commitment to net zero by 2050 coming out of the Paris COP. And when we did that, I think, living our values of integrity and excellence, we worried a lot about greenwashing. And it was at that point that the team said, we need to get our plan to net zero approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. And so one of the things we're proud of is that we're one of the first 40 companies on the planet to have our plan vetted, and we will report out on that each and every year. So I'll just maybe conclude it there and say, let's jump in on decarbonization. As the CEO, I believe it not only is a great way for us to live our values, but there are, and we're seeing it unfold around us, existential dangers if we don't pay particular attention to carbonization. And I mean, like a long time ago. But what I find very encouraging is that we're seeing the problem, but we're also seeing a lot of the solutions at the same time. And the solutions seem to be gaining momentum as we move forward. So without further ado, Anne-Marie Angular, who has agreed to be our moderator tonight, is going to take us through a discussion here. She is the Managing Director and Senior Vice President for EMEA for the International Well Building Institute, and remains very active in making sure that the Well AP accreditation process is maintained, and supports the industry as a Well faculty member as well. She's a veteran of Air Engineering for 11 years, where she brought a lot of the sustainability and wellness concepts. And she also has a degree in architecture from New York Institute of Technology. So thank you for joining us tonight, and turn the panel over to you.
Great, thank you, Walter.
Sure.
Very exciting to be here. It's a real proud moment to be able to have this conversation in this location with this Milliken family who feel really passionate about this subject area. So I'm really excited to pull together such an incredibly interesting and diverse panel. So I'm going to do some really quick introductions here. Just to remind everybody what the subject matter is, it's why can't we decarbonize faster? The pathway to net zero in the built environment. And I'd like to start off by introducing Neil Pinnell. So Neil is the head of design, innovation, and property solutions at Landsec. Landsec is one of the largest real estate portfolios in Europe, based here in London. Neil is also a director at the BCO, which is the British Council of Offices, and is the chair of technical affairs. Thank you, Neil, for coming. To Neil's right is Mel Allwood. Mel and I worked together for many years. Mel is the director at Arab, leading the entire sustainability group, which means that she works across sustainability consultants to achieve the sort of low carbon, high impact, high social value buildings and refurbishments. We're also joined by Adam. Adam joins us as a principal from Perkins and Will here in London, and really is going to help us give the perspective of materials, low carbon materials for both global architecture and interior design programs. We have a very interesting guest, Tawny Lonier, who's going to be giving us a very unique perspective on the economic side of this discussion. Tawny joins us from the BDO. They provide advisory and business services to companies in all sectors of the economy, and she's got a special focus on sustainable finance. And we have Giovanna Jagger, who's from my team, the IWBI. She's one of our senior account managers dealing with all of our global clients, and has a really interesting, also in-depth focus on both sustainability and ESG. I'm very proud to have Maury Lawrence here, who is the Vice President of Sustainability at Milliken, and really keen to share what Milliken is doing across these really interesting topics. So we've got about 45 minutes. I'm probably going to have to cut people off every once in a while when we start going over the time. We're going to try and have 3 interesting conversations, about 15 minutes each. So with that, I'm going to kick off with a really interesting summary of a project that Neil has just completed. This is a project called The Forge. The Forge is the UK's first net zero commercial office development. Landsec was awarded funding for the innovative design and groundbreaking construction techniques on this project. Techniques contributed to at least, and you might need to correct me if we've got better stats, 25% reduction in embodied carbon, and a savings of 178 tons of steel, which is the equivalent of just under 14 London double-decker buses in weight. So it's a really incredible statistic. I think we all need to hear some really positive news about what's achievable in this world when we're dealing with such a grave topic. So could you tell the audience and all of us here like a little bit about that challenge? And this was 2 years ago, so you were really ahead of your time. And what has it meant for Landsec to be kind of positioning that building?
I think the Forge became, if you like, a focus for our thoughts around innovation. And what we're really looking to do was to combine efficiencies in construction with high performance in terms of operational energy use in buildings into the one product, if you like, that the Forge became. So in terms of the operational energy side, to some degree, there were paths open to us to reposition the building to work as an all-electric building, to use heat pump technology, so that we can produce all the heating and cooling requirements of the building from a highly efficient energy source, which also could derive its supply from renewable electricity, so which we commit to anyway across our portfolio. The bigger challenge was to start to really attack the embodied carbon, and as we move forward where our infrastructure becomes decarbonised, the relevance of the carbon that you spend in creating buildings or modernising and changing buildings in the first place, and actually through their life cycle, the world of refits becomes a much more important part going forward in terms of minimising the carbon footprint of the built environment sector. So here it was about trying to drive efficiency, trying to drive productivity in construction, and to learn the lessons from other industries. So what I looked into was a thing called design for manufacture assembly, which has been used very successfully in manufacturing, where there's continuous improvement in the way you go forward when you try and deliver things that are built much more effectively with low waste streams and bring them into a construction environment, which is very alien to many of those aspects, which is very much a bespoke cottage industry on steroids sometimes, responding to a lot of creative input from the designers, but and ultimately satisfying those requirements, but not necessarily in an efficient way. And I think the sort of learnings from that manufacturing industry is the high efficiency that you can apply to it. And when you apply efficiency, that's often at the base of good sustainability thinking. And so we were able to reduce the amount of material that we use. We were able to focus on the way that the designs were brought together to integrate the process and minimise our use of resources, which led us to really position the building to meet as probably the most defined net zero carbon target at the moment in the marketplace, which was the framework from the Green Building Council, UK Green Building Council. So a combination of that operational carbon, effectively moving it to a position of net zero, minimising the embodied carbon by building very efficiently and using materials that were lower carbon input. In fact, the raised floor is actually a reused product, a sort of pre-loved product. So again, minimising that carbon footprint. And finally, just offsetting what was left with gold standard offsets. So that gave us compliance with that framework and enabled us to put into the marketplace both our first net zero carbon building, and I think the first one that had qualified its design under that framework process.
Incredible. I know, Adam, you spent a lot of time on the Perkins and Will side with this idea that selecting material is one of your lowest hanging fruit. And could you talk to us a little about what that's been like for Perkins and Will to kind of establish this, selection process?
Difficult. I mean, one of the problems we find is there's so many different targets and metrics and beliefs, and so when there's 70 in our team, trying to instill consistently in what we think good practice is or what a good product looks like is really you can spend a lot of time and effort on just that rather than the actual specification or the creative input side of things. And so trying to remove the friction and the complexity of getting to good specification is a big part of our job. Is how do we make it easy for people to make the right decisions? But one of the key things that we're really struggling with now is really the movement from new to reuse or pre-loved, as Neil put it, products. How we can find the right balance between specification of new, high quality, highly positively sustainable products with products which have already been created and don't require virgin material extraction. And so that there's a lot of great products on the market that are sustainable products, and people can obviously be leading in that. And so that's kind of one side of the thing. But developing a market for second life products is really where we've been emphasising a lot of our time. We sort of feel as architects, we can only get so involved in the operational energy side of things, but the embodied energy, the embodied carbon is really where a lot of our focus is. And I like to think operational energy is like a science, lots of numbers and figures and data about energy use, the consumption that an office building has. But embodied carbon is like an art, it requires much more kind of creative, non-lateral thinking about how we can really drive down the embodied carbon in physical things. And so a lot of our time is on that, but we've sort of started to kind of move away from worrying about specification and thinking about process, because specifying good products is important, but how can we as a global business really influence the process of design and construction? That's really where we're going to get much greater benefits over a period of time. And we've been lucky to work on some really great projects. We're currently working on JLL's headquarters at the moment, and their push is for it to be the most sustainable fit out in the world, and they've got really high targets on reduction of embodied carbon. And so for that, we have to just think about reuse as well as thinking about specifying new things.
Wow, really impressive. And Mel, from your perspective at Arab, is this a push or a pull? Are clients really pushing the boundaries, or is Arab, as usual, kind of trying to set the limit of what people should be looking at?
It's absolutely a push from our clients. The landscape in the last 18 months, 2 years has absolutely changed to a point where we are no longer having to push doors open to say, listen to me. We're managing the intensity with which people are responding to it. That doesn't mean that change is happening as fast as we need it to. It takes us 7 to 10 years to design and deliver and hand over a building. We can't make a change overnight, and that time scale means that we're always struggling with the overlap between the speed with which our clients' expectations change and the fact that quite often we're working with projects that maybe we started 7, 8 years ago, and that sets a real challenge for us. There's no point in complaining about that. that's what we have to manage and deal with. And the challenge that that sets for us is saying, you know, how can we respond to what our clients' questions are now, but how can we prepare ourselves and our clients for the questions that they may be asking us in 7 or 8 years' time when we begin to start to put these projects in the market? How can we make sure that our projects are ready then to the expectations that they're going to have? So, you know, these are exciting times. It is hard, but these are the battles we want to be fighting.
So Maury, I would imagine you've got quite a bit of experience, like to be able to provide guidance on the supply chain conversations and just Milliken's position of getting to net zero. What would you like to tell aspiring architects and designers about how you guys are going to help us make that easier?
Well, first, congratulations on the Forge.
Thank you.
And that's wonderful. We all need examples of how it can be done. And we echo what we're hearing from each of you in that it's time for scale. It's time for momentum. It's challenging. Milliken's approach has been to listen, to support what our customers are asking for, and also to rally around acting what's right for humankind. So while we had our 2025 goals, when the SBTi standard came out for net zero, we said, is that enough? They were scope 1 and 2. We've heard you all say you really have to look at embodied carbon, and we knew we needed to look at all scopes. And we knew we needed to continue to create momentum. So we said, are we doing enough? And with the standard out, we went ahead and knew we needed to look at all of our scopes, account for them, and set aggressive net zero targets for 2030. And to try to create consistency. We've heard from our own teams, we hear quite a lot. Yes, there's a lot out there about carbon, but it's quite confusing. Embodied carbon, LCA carbon, net zero for a building, net zero for a company. So I think one of our challenges is how do we create this action with clarity and transparency when it's really complicated? And that's something we'll all have to do together.
So I think we're gonna pivot a little bit from this conversation. So I think we've set a really good foundation, but I would love to hear from Gio first in terms of, you know, we're talking about, you know, very much focused on design, built environment outcomes, but there's another side to this, which is the economics and the ESG performance. And I know that your focus has always been on the ROI of social materiality indicators. And I think that will dovetail really nicely into Tony's position here again about sustainable finance. So how do you help keep the alignment of the conversation that's strictly design, built environment related, but at the same time try and understand that there's a social materiality conversation here happening? And ESG has had its it continues to, you know, require people to do a significant amount of transparency and reporting.
Yeah. You know, I find the topic super interesting because in reality, what makes a building, the built environment, an effective environment is the people. So the importance of that aspect, yeah, you're right, it's a passion of mine to make sure that we're considering both people and planet when we're looking at strategies and reporting and how we move towards the right strategy for reporting. And that comes back to the asset management and asset owners into their ROI. The question we get asked regularly is, what does it mean to invest in a WELL product? What does it mean to be part of the WELL family membership? What does it mean? It means that we're considering that aspect as well as everything else. Earlier we were touching on the disaggregation, so many distractions, so much, what do we focus on, how do we report? And then you have to consider materials and all the things that are coming up. All of those end up costing a lot. And then when we look at sustainable finance, which Tony will be able to guide us a bit more on, this is where you see the gap. And this is where people, I think, pause and think, I don't know how to do this. The investment is just too great and it's not helping anybody. In reality, it is, because we're making progress and we're seeing excellent examples. But we do need to standardize a lot of the work we're doing, and the alignment to regulation, legislation, and other frameworks doesn't help, but I think we're coming together. I mean, the next couple of days will teach us a lot as well into what's happening. But overall, I think if we hadn't started the effort, I know the journey has been difficult. You've lived it as much as many of us, but we're making progress. And I think the conversation, from my point of view, in the only 10 years I've had in sustainability, seems a bit more educated, a bit more focused on initiatives and delivery, better alignment to reporting, which means you can start to focus on materials and plan, which means we're heading, I think, the right in the right direction towards sustainable finance, where I think Tony might correct me, she might say, no, we're not there yet. But I think is, heading that way. What we also hear a lot from our financial institution members is that they look at us to help them assess how to best place sustainable bonds, green bonds, and all that kind of things that are more relevant to them. So that means we need to translate our efforts into their world. And I think it's your turn to educate us a bit more.
Well, Tony, you
Ask for a question from Anne-Marie.
well, you definitely helped, I think you're gonna help us kind of understand that really interesting economic nuance and really understanding if decarbonization targets in general in the built environment align with industry and organizational growth plans. Like, how do those work together? And then, we know there's looming targets on the SDGs. That is a very prominent set of guidelines that companies around the world are really aligning themselves with. So where do you see the, like we just said, the investment potential and the alignment with having to meet these targets and the growth that that company needs to achieve?
Being in such an illustrious company here, I mean, I'm not an engineer, I don't work in the built environment, I'm just a backroom boffin that is very, very focused on sustainable finance. But I guess bringing it back to what is the question we're trying to answer today? And it's why not carbonize faster? And I have to say that probably the financial side of things has not been helpful in doing that. It's because investors try very, very hard to find ways not to invest in these types of things. But with the changes in legislation and regulation, it's forcing some recalcitrant companies coming together and saying, this is what we're doing. And we have to start doing the reports. We have to start making those targets and measuring those things. But investing is not about picking the winners, it's about avoiding the losers. And how do you avoid the losers? By making sure that you understand that the company looks at the risks in their entirety and how does that impact their growth? Because you are investing in their growth. You're not investing just in them. You're investing in how are they going to grow, not only their company, but how does the company grow within the industry and with the environment, much more broadly in the environment. So some of these things that I've been hearing today, and I think it's really, really positive, is that sustainable finance can only go as fast as the slowest actor, because they are investing other people's money. So they're by their very nature, they're not forward leaning finance. But on a flip, they are expecting now companies to have a net zero plan. It is no longer, oh, I have this net zero plan and aren't I fabulous? And look at the shiny thing that I just put together. It's now talking about if you don't have a net zero plan or decarbonization plan, you are then a pariah. You're being pushed then to the edges. But understanding the sustainability risk, understanding the ESG, and I use those two things in different ways. ESG is about metrics, it's about measuring, and sustainability is about the process. How do you become sustainable? So when you're an investor, you're looking at what is the growth of the company and what is the resiliency of that company. And in order to do that, you have to understand where's the data coming from, but you also have to understand is how does that company fit within their growth plans, within the industry, and within themselves, because that's what they're investing in. So if we get back to why not carbonize faster, I would probably say that the sustainable finance or finance itself has not been a huge advocate for going faster, because they don't go very fast at all. But with the increasing quality of the data that's coming out, I think that we are going to see an increased quickness because we have regulation, legislation. The recalcitrant companies are starting to think, oh, how can I comply? And they're doing these things. I mean, rarely is there a land sector that's looking so much further in the future that says, oh my God, this is a shining light on the top of the hill. You guys did a green bond. It was brilliantly.
First one this year.
Yeah, it was brilliantly embraced by the financial community, and green bonds themselves have gone up like gangbusters in the last half year. Why? It's because investors are starting to see we have the data now. We can then put it on our own models, and we can figure out how are you managing risk. What is it about resilience? How are you making sure that you're adaptive?
Yeah.
So Neil, tell us about the fund, the retrofit fund.
Well, I guess it all fits together in that overall plan. I think you said that Milliken sort of embraced the SBR targets, and we did the same. I think we were the first real estate company to set a target based on the science-based input back in 2016. And then that sets you on a trajectory, and you have to start to plan out how you are going to achieve your goals. We adjusted that target after the COP to make a 1.5 degree alignment. And we've actually adjusted again because the recent changes requiring much more scope 3 emissions to be included in those targets. So we'd originally set our target to get to a net zero organisation by 2030, and we've had to revise that to 2040, but we kept all the targets that we had for 2030 in any case around energy and the buildings. And I've talked about the Forge, which I think is a shining example of what you can do in new build with real efficiency-led, design-led thinking, that's thinking about how you make the products that are going to be used and how you put them together in an efficient and effective way. But that's all about the new product, if you like, we're putting into our portfolio, which needs to be net zero from the get-go, or else we're just giving ourselves a bigger challenge with our wider portfolio, which we've also got to reposition. And that's important to maintain our competitive position in the marketplace. More and more organisations now are looking to take the best real estate that they can in terms of its performance and all of their aspects, but increasingly now they're asking the question about where it sits in terms of its carbon positioning. And I'm pleased to say on the Forge, our first occupier that signed up is actually a carbon company, Carbon Clean, and so we've attracted a lot of companies that are really looking at their own businesses and want to be associated with a building that's got huge credibility. So that is a market factor. It puts us in a competitive advantage when we're competing against others for those same customers. But we can't afford that our portfolio, which is the bulk of our investment, to just sit there and gradually fall into obsolescence. So we need to reposition it. So again, I think we're the first company to actually put a fund together within the business, 135 million, to reinvest back into those assets, to reposition them, to decarbonise them. And we're using various approaches, air source heat pumps to replace fossil fuel burning on site for heating, big investments in large scale PV, just getting the BMS systems to work better, and then looking at how AI can maybe help to supercharge that once we've got them to the best place they can be. And importantly, working with our customers to try and get them to work with us and look at the behaviours and how people use buildings, because that's equally important. And when you start modelling the performance of energy and use, you really need to understand how your building is going to work, but how people are going to use the building. And that all needs to come together to put us in the position that we're aiming for. But I think if we position ourselves in that way, then hopefully like-minded companies that need real estate solutions will look to us as one of their first choice providers, and that gives us hopefully a sustainable business model going forward, which is really important.
May I just add something to this, Anne-Marie? What I love about the solution is that you are looking to solve more than one thing at one time.
Yeah.
When I first started 30 years ago, it was like we focus on climate change, and that's all we do. We'd have one solution. And now a lot of companies are moving to say, if we can solve this, this is also solved, and this can be solved, and this can be. So finding a portfolio of solutions, but acting once and having the different solutions, which is incredibly powerful. So you have the social side of things as well. You know, how is the building used, and then how is the building built, and then how will the building, what its end life look like as well.
Yeah, and we can't ignore, people, what makes our business ultimately, and it's people that use buildings. So, investing in people that realise their potential, working with the communities that we work with, we take that all seriously too. So we have a social fund. We want to help give people opportunities in life, and also to create solutions for people, whether it's places to shop, to work, to live, to enjoy their leisure time. So the company has an holistic vision, and we're trying to fulfil that. It's not easy. I think you said there is a lot of challenges, and particularly in the world of embodied carbon, because it isn't as scientifically rigorous, certainly not yet, compared to operational carbon. But you've got to start somewhere, and you need to push. And that's why we need the cooperation of manufacturers, I think, and suppliers to help in that area, to actually give us accurate assessments of what their products contain and how that sits in terms of a carbon equation.
And Maury, how did you find the focus on renewable energy targets as a business for Milliken across retail, manufacturing? What kind of a challenge was that to be able to address?
I'd like to say it's easy, but that's not true. All of these have trade-offs and complexities. But for sure, when we set our first renewable energy target in 2018, the one beauty of setting a goal is that teams mobilize and you surprise yourself on what you can achieve together. So we've been able to achieve that initial target of increasing our renewable energy to 100,000 megawatt hours per year. And then obviously to hit our net zero goals, we require much more renewable energy, not just for our operations, which is critical. We want to focus on what we can control, meaning our manufacturing sites, our showrooms, where we operate. But then we need to impact where we influence. So our supply chain, both up and down the supply chain, but specifically on renewable energy at our operations. Now we're dependent. Climate change is a collective action issue. So policy really matters in terms of greening the grid and making sure the infrastructure is put in place. So we're active in that front. We also have been active in investing in renewable energy, both solar and credits. And of course, we're very active in looking at on-site solar, on-site type ways to expand renewable energy so that we can meet these aggressive 2030 targets, which include reducing our scope 1 and 2 by 50%. But that means we need the solutions there that are both sustainably attractive and financially attractive. And that will take all of us for sure to continue to push forward.
Well, as we talk about, difficult metrics to achieve, I think, Mel, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective from Arab's point of view. We have multiple metrics and rating systems that are out there that are supposed to help really guide the conversation. How do you think that these key metrics are helping, or are we still devoid of some clarity, whether it's net zero as a definition or sustainability targets, or the alignment of sustainability targets and net zero definitions? What's your take on that?
I think we are moving very fast in terms of those definitions and in terms of understanding what we're trying to achieve. I think we're becoming much more articulate in defining what it is we're trying to do, and we're becoming much better at setting targets that will help us achieve that. And I think that situation has changed very much. I think it's really important for us to always be clear about what the target is trying to achieve. So, for example, the renewable energy target is a really great example. What we're trying to do there is not maximise the amount of PV panels that are built. We're trying to use that as a lever to minimise demand so that we can meet the reductions that we have with what we have available. And I think it's important for us as a community to make sure that we keep the pressure on being articulate about what we're trying to achieve, and to constantly check back with ourselves to make sure that the targets that we're setting are the right targets to achieve the outcome that we want to achieve. Sometimes I think we all lose touch with that a little bit. And sometimes I think when we have a complexity of a number of different targets, it really forces us to take that step backwards and say, what else are we going to gain when we meet this target, and why do we need to do those two things at once? And I think the wellbeing piece is a really good example in buildings. Absolutely, we're trying to deliver low carbon buildings, but there's no point if we deliver buildings that people don't want to be in. A low carbon building that makes people unhappy is a sustainability fail. And that's a really good example for me of where it's really important for us to have two quite different targets. One about how do we drive towards net zero, and a second about how do we make sure that these are really healthy, thriving buildings that people want. So there's a limit to how simple we can make it, I think is the answer.
So it's a really interesting perspective, and I know, Adam, you're probably looking at this from recycling material, circular economy. We talked about these various materials and products that are coming back into the industry and having a second life. What do you think, what processes need to happen to make that more mainstream?
Well, what I like to say recycling is bad, and people tell me off for saying that, but I think that is a kind of mind. When I was at school, we used to draw pictures of recycling, and that was great, right? But actually, recycling is not the answer. It is quite bad. We need to move beyond recycling. Of course, there is a place for recycling, and there is some good recycling, but a lot of recycling that happens in this country it just gets shipped to another country, or we just burn it, and that's not recycling. And so I think there's some mindset shift in the kind of general public about we need to move beyond recycling being any sort of a solution. And so for me, the barrier really is, is around manufacturers. And, I spend a lot of time with, say, furniture manufacturers. And what I say to them is, I want to go into a showroom and I want to have the opportunity to buy new product, to buy second life products directly from manufacturers. In the same way that if I went into a Patagonia store, I could buy new or second life apparel. And I think Patagonia have done some really great things in terms of pushing the needle on reuse. And I don't think at the moment the reuse industry in construction is kind of third party people. So for example, the raised access floor example that Neil used is a great product. Raised access floors are, in our calculations, the largest contributor to embodied carbon in a fit out. So even if you can use second life raised access floor, you've already done a good job. But it's third party organisations who are intermediary in that process. And so I really believe until manufacturers, people who make products, really get behind putting in place systems where they can develop second life products out of their own loop, that's always going to be a barrier. I want to go and see people who are making stuff and be given the choice between new, which is often the right solution, and products which have come from a second or a more circular stream. I think there's very few manufacturers across all of the different packages within the construction industry who are really embracing that as a business model. And I appreciate that it's a messy, complex, probably not very profitable business model to start off with, but at some point it will become a much bigger part of their business. And the raised access, for example, is used a lot, but it's a good example because the company that do it now, it's one company who are kind of leading that. They had no business for ages. It's had loads of raised access floor and nobody wanted to buy it. And now they haven't got enough raised access floor. So, them, and I think it's been a 10-year journey from them, from thinking this is a good idea to anyone wanting it, to it becoming a problem of supply. And so it is a 10-year journey for people to go from the niche of reuse to a strong business case. But I truly believe that if you're not going to offer that service in the future, people won't be coming to you. So for me, manufacturers really getting on board with understanding how they can offer alternatives to new products is going to be the game changer for us to make the big changes.
Adam, I couldn't support you more. What's really interesting about that is that what is really beginning to emerge with that kind of 10-year journey, which absolutely we see that completely from other perspectives, is that the barriers to doing that reuse piece, so often we've got enmeshed in the idea that those are technical barriers. But as you say, that most of the barriers to doing this are not technical barriers at all. Yes, sometimes we need to test things in ways to understand what they can do the thing. But so many of the barriers are around, can we achieve a warranty? Where are we going to store this?
Yeah, logistics.
Who's going to pay to move it around?
Yeah.
Who's going to deal with security and insurance? How do we collect the data to allow us to understand what the gap is between supply and demand? And I think the shift that's been happening is that we're really beginning to accept that those aren't one-off problems. Those are actually the environment that we have to solve in order to unlock this reuse piece, because absolutely we need to shift to a reuse model and not also.
And when people say those things to me, those barriers, I say to them, if you're going to extract something out of the ground and make something, you have to go through a warranty process. You have to get the logistics. So people are doing that, but they're just taking from the natural environment, as opposed to the idea of urban mining, which is like everything we need is here. Everything we need to build another building is within EC1. If we could just access it appropriately and process it appropriately. So we already do it for new stuff. We can apply that same thinking for old stuff, but this isn't the margin financially on it, which is a different problem.
It's the education piece that we're going through, though. You just said 10 years and so on. I've always said sustainability requires an aggressive and ambitious strategy with very soft landing, because by nature it needs to be inclusive, which means you need to educate all the people. There's a great mind that once said it's not easy being green. Right? And it's not, that doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to show the journeys. We're probably at different stages of that journey, and the industries are at different stages. What I'm starting to see, though, the ability we have to influence the sustainable finance is going to cost them a bit more at the beginning. But like you said, it's not an option anymore. We're going into that world, we're gonna be short of new items for different reasons.
Yeah.
Not just in the interior, but the construction, all those things. But innovation will happen when people relax a little bit more about in terms of the strategy set. We can now start to soft land those ideas and implement and work together. But collaboration has never been stronger from all angles.
Yeah,
that
no, I
can
agree.
see.
I agree. But I mean, I do feel that the barrier to accelerating decarbonisation is money. Like it's still more expensive. My belief is it's still more expensive to deliver a meaningfully sustainable building or interior than it is to deliver a non-sustainable building, and that's generally around economies of scale. So so when we're working with clients who want a fundamentally sustainable project, we say, let's just hope it costs the same as it would have done if we did for everything high value, high end new. That's our financial kind of like barrier for the project. Let's set a budget which is high quality, high end, everything new. Can we then deliver a sustainable project within that price point? Can we get a carbon budget that aligns with that financial budget? Obviously, not everyone can afford that type of spend, and so until it's no less expensive to deliver sustainable as it is to deliver a kind of standard project, it's always going to give clients, kind of like difficult decisions to be made until they start to get penalised for their carbon footprints as businesses, and therefore their carbon footprint is going to be a kind of taxable aspect of their business. It will then be cheaper to deliver a more sustainable environment because they'll save money on that penalisation. And until that happens, it's still really hard for companies to decide to spend more money for a sustainable solution.
Well, I definitely think that Maureen's probably got some answers because she's been through the process of trying to find materials that are more circular. And I know that Milliken is really aggressively looking at take back products and being able to really understand that it's not going to be easy to get the product back and take off the adhesives, but it's definitely possible.
And we hear you, Adam. You're making a call to action for manufacturers on reuse and not just recycling. And certainly Milliken believes that advancing circularity is necessary to decarbonization. They are intertwined, gets back to systems thinking. We can't only focus on solving for one, there are many levers, not just renewable energy, but also mindset shifts on how we view resources altogether. So Milliken is very much aligned and working on delivering solutions across both our products and our operations and how we train and work with our people. I do think there's this critical component in addition to material use and how we view circularity and carbon that ties into, yes, data is important. Yes, these targets are important. We might come back to that. But this notion of social sustainability, how you put people at the center of the decarbonization conversation, I think will also accelerate because it's very hard for many to understand even what we're talking about or what the choices are outside of it's more expensive. However, if we make it an issue about safety and we start to really understand all the ways when you're looking at finance that risk and opportunities come up, when you're really looking at biodiversity and climate and air quality and your ability to enjoy a building or green space near it or feel safe in it or get to it, there's a very critical notion we all need to get better at in making social sustainability not over here separate and only about necessarily training or classical definitions of social, but how do social and planet intertwine inextricably so that we can advance material change conversations so that everyone understands the beauty of reuse. It's not a second choice, it could be a primary choice. That mindset shift is really critical to putting people first. And at Milliken, we report on people first in our strategy and in our report. We talk about putting people first. We want to engage our people and engage our supply chains and customers. And I think all of us need to figure out how better to unlock that. We can't bring everyone in through the data and metrics, but if we make it personal and we make it real to them, then we'll help accelerate.
I think Lansec has also looked at social value as an outcome and potentially using the social value portal. Is that one of the tools that you're all using, or is the BCO also helping to kind of test a social value tool?
I think probably, Guy, who's heads the sustainability group within the BCO, and he's very much in that space and has worked hard to create social value solutions that I think a lot of local authorities are using as well as clients. So yes, we've done that. We've done impact reports as well to understand what is the wider footprint impact of what we do when we develop buildings or refurbish and extend their life. So I think that it is a holistic picture. There isn't just one thing that you need to do. I think that there's a big responsibility, I think, with designers as well, because if I look back to the example of the Forge, yes, that was a new building, but the thinking in terms of driving efficiencies meant that we used a lot less material. We took a whole chunk of steel out of the building, we used less concrete, we used more sustainable concrete, but there was just good design thinking that went into it. The original design of the building, before I sort of took it over as a sort of innovation project, and we started to look at how to drive efficiencies. We significantly reduced the basement by about 50% in terms of area, about 70% by volume, which meant we were excavating less and we were putting less material into the ground to create space, and yet we were still providing the same product in terms of area, in fact a little bit more, because we worked hard on the efficiency of the building. So I think designers have really got to step up to the mark in terms of how they design things, and to look at more standardisation approach we go forward. The other part of DFMA is to look at things as kits of parts which others can use. So, and if you then create more standardised components that are used in construction, buildings, when they are ultimately disassembled, you get the parts back again. And if with the technology that we've got, that we can track the life cycle of those products, then you're in a position to be able to make that next use of them so much more easier than it is now. We're already seeing, the example of the raised floor is one example. Another example, steel is a very energy intensive product. And there are one or two steel stockists now in the UK that are starting to curate spaces to gather together steel that's removed from buildings that are being deconstructed, and now refurbishing that and putting that back into the marketplace. And now, because everybody's really targeting low embodied carbon solutions, getting your hands on some elements of steel that are effectively wiped off your balance sheet because you're reusing them is a major win. But trying to get the right sizes is challenging, because you're working with a back catalogue that was never thought through to be used in that way, but our front catalogue can be. So as we go forward, we can make that process easier in the future. So there's responsibilities on everybody, I think, in the whole eco-structure of the built environment, from clients setting themselves the targets and pushing themselves to make a difference in the way that they behave, but also then the response from the designers, from the contractors and from the supply chain, so manufacturers key within that, to provide the right solutions and to do the thinking that's needed to enable the future to be much more sustainable than the past.
What I'm hearing here, somebody doesn't work in the built environment, is I'm hearing the fifth dimension. To me, the fifth dimension is about imagination. You have the fourth dimensions, fourth being time, but the fifth is about imagination. And what I'm hearing here from this roundtable is about imagination, how to be creative, how to be innovative. So it's not about the targets. It's not about recycling, but it's about, we know that we have planetary boundaries. We know that we're dealing with these restrictions. How can we be innovative? And I liked your point when it comes to thinking about the social sustainability. Humans are amazing at being adaptive. So even if it's going to go up by 3 degrees, I guarantee you somebody will adapt to that, right? But what we're trying to do here is saying, we're comfortable with how it is. We know how it works. Let's be innovative. Let's use our imagination to actually maintain how it is here for future generations, which is the Milliken way, right?
I think that was, you were the first person to kick off what I think is the sort of final round of give me something positive to say. And I thought that was really well said, that this is about an imagination. Next series of solutions is going to really come from systems thinking, being able to really challenge the expected way of doing design. So I'm going to give everybody a minute to think. Let's close this out with something positive, reasons to believe that this, even though we know it's challenging, even though it's an uphill battle, give us a word or two or a sentence about what's a positive way to end this. So Gio, can you kick us off?
Sure. I think what I'm hearing in terms of going into a slightly different industry from sustainability as well, the real estate, the construction side of the world and all that, is that I hear that people really want to do better. And we have, from one side, we have the frameworks and standards and certifications and all the things that are telling us you should do it this way. We have regulation legislation coming in hard. We have no time, but we have the opportunity to come together and start to innovate, knowing what we know. So if we all focus on what we know and deliver that piece, I guarantee we're gonna make progress, and we're gonna be amazed at when we look at the reports in April next year in 2025, how much progress we've made, because I think the momentum is here. We just can't drop guards, and continue. It's not easy being green, but let's go for it.
I was just thinking about how to, I mean, I just read a book by the guy that started Patagonia. I use that as an again. He basically said, like, once you accept that we're fucked, then you can just then you can really think about what's next. And, we are a bit fucked. And I think probably everyone in this room realizes that. I don't think enough people outside of this room realize that. But once you say, that's happened, we've done it, our generations have created this problem, we're not, small things are not going to make a difference anymore. We have to make big steps, big changes, sort of institutional, systematic changes are what's going to make any sort of difference. I think that once you understand that, it really is freeing and linked to that imagination thing. And I think the other thing that I'm excited by, I've got 2 small kids, and so you want your kids to have had some sort of the luck of the world that we've had is, we talk a lot about audiences, and, the audiences that we talk to, our demographic, the people who are now starting to run real estate companies, the people who are now becoming accountants, the people who are now using our buildings, they really care in the way that my generation and older generations didn't really care. They celebrate this idea that we call a new beauty, which is like, when you look at a building or a space, you're looking at the values beyond the aesthetic. And I think, before, there was always values around efficiency and those sorts of things, but actually, the purpose of a building, where it comes from, the social value, the fact that it might not be perfect, but there's real reasons behind that. We understand that those audiences really care and believe in that, and that they will be driving what we will do in the future, and that they'll be our clients, or they already are our clients. And so that really gives me, kind of like a lot of kind of stimulus and hopes.
You asked me about the SDGs, and I didn't really touch on those, so please forgive me. But with the changing demographics, if the SDGs are going to be delivered, they're going to have to be delivered by cities. And part of the city environment, of course, is the built environment. So the built environment is seen as these object, but actually it is an integral part of delivering some, these 17 goals that we have that have been identified as the world's largest challenges. So SDGs on one side, there's a big, huge challenge. But if I'm listening here, then we have a very good way to make sure that cities are part of a solution, an innovative solution, than holding people back.
Great. Neil?
I think the good thing is, I think we have the tools to do what we need to do. My profession is an engineer, and engineering is the appliance of science. I think the science has put all the tools out there. We now need to use our knowledge and engineering skills to develop the future of real estate such that it delivers the sustainable spaces that we need. Both my children have gone into an engineering world, slightly different routes. So one's working for Historic Scotland, perhaps helping to preserve the past. And my son and my daughter works in central London, helping to develop new buildings and major refurbishments of buildings. So they're both taking that sort of thinking forward into what they do. So I think the future is obviously young people and the way that they really relate to the environment that we're in. But the responsibility, I think, relies with the older generations who got us to where we are now and have a responsibility to make sure that we push forward at all the aspects that we've talked about today to try and make the world a better place.
Yeah, similar probably. No, absolutely not underplaying the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us, and that every day that mountain gets a steeper one to climb. But also every day I walk into rooms full of people, my colleagues, our collaborators, our peers, our clients, and I look around rooms and I think, we've got all the right brains here. If this room full of people can't solve this, every day you walk into a room and there's a different mix of people who give you new perspectives, new passion, just ways of thinking and doing and actually making change happen in a way that is, it's really different. The world has changed, I think. Now's the time.
Well, the point you made earlier, the buildings have got to work. There's no good building things that don't work, because that wastes all the carbon.
Yeah.
We did that in the 70s, and we can't afford to do that again. So they have to be good, and I think that's why the role accreditations is a good thing, because it balances all those things to ensure that we create good environments.
But this is against the engineering's credo, isn't it? Engineer's credo. But you build something, it doesn't work, suddenly that engineering taken away from you, right?
Well, I've always had a different perspective in the way that I've approached it, in terms of, I saw the lessons from what happened at that period of time, and you just think, what a waste, We need to put our effort into creating things that work. That's simple.
What a waste of resource, but also what a waste of time and what a waste of goodwill.
Yeah.
We need to be better. Yes. But, I think we see that with Milliken as well. Absolutely we're of the passion about creating a circular product. But you also want everybody to walk into a room with your product and say, this
Great space.
That's great space.
Yes,
So that's a no compromise, isn't it?
yes,
We cannot afford to
absolutely.
deliver a lesser product that doesn't meet the bar.
So Lauren, maybe you can close us out from this conversation and decided that tomorrow you're going to get to attend a really important event, the Reuters event, and maybe there's a bit of just summary of how Milliken's really looking forward, giving us some really good reasons to believe.
First, each of you gave reasons to believe, so thank you, and thanks for moderating. I think companies play a role, and at Milliken we say, together we strive to positively impact, and it's true. So maybe I'll just give a few examples just from today to make it very real about what gives us optimism. First, conversations like this, coming together across functions and professions to have important dialogue. And as you mentioned, our CEO's here to have conversations with over 1,000 people on how to scale decarbonization faster. So you have your top leader committed to those conversations. Then I met a Milliken team member, Louise, never met her before, met her today, and she's a sustainability champion. She leads sustainability education. She's gotten additional education this year, so she has more accreditation when she goes to our customers and credibility. And that's all on her own. Solutions come from everywhere. And in my email inbox, another Milliken associate emailed me and said, Mari, in our operations, we figured out a way to reuse carpet scraps in a unique new way that we're looking at. And so operational solutions. And that's what you need. You need everybody's action to matter and be in the game. And you also need to find hope in daily actions too, because it's a massive problem to solve, an opportunity. But there are signs of progress, and tonight has been that too. And we do look forward to the conference discussion tomorrow. So thanks for mentioning that.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you for moderating. To the whole panel, I talked initially about trying to operationalize our values, and I see such evidence of that here. And these issues are going to outlive all of our careers, but it's very, very heartening and encouraging to see so much progress and attention and intellectual and energy being put into it. So thank you for
Thank you. It was
doing such a nice
what a
job for us.
privilege. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.